I'm Janet Silver. MPs and senators are back home in their ridings until late next month. A few bills received royal assent before the Christmas break, including the fall economic statement. Yet much remains for the government's agenda for the new year. And 2 days before Parliament rose, NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh threatened to pull his party's support to prop up the Liberal government. Why? Joining me now are two political operatives, very experienced political operatives, I may add, Jon Dugal and Jake Enwright. They're both my colleagues here at Syntax. And Jon, I'm going to start with you, and we're going to start with the NDP leader Jagmeet Singh threatening to pull his party's support for the confidence agreement that he made earlier this year with the Liberal government. Why is he threatening to do that?
I have no sweet clue. That's my final answer.
Well,
am I even allowed to do that? Are we allowed to put that good of an answer?
No, I'm sure you have a clue. Healthcare, maybe?
It boggles my mind what's going through Jagmeet Singh's mind right now. Because, and I want to be very clear with people, I was on record on this podcast a few months ago saying that I actually thought that the deal that he struck with Justin Trudeau was somewhat of a stroke of genius for him. And I thought that for a few reasons at the time. It at least was going to give the NDP and Jagmeet Singh some reason to be relevant within federal politics, because without that agreement, there's no reason that we would have had to talk about the NDP at all this year, right? The government was sailing through. We all knew that the NDP wasn't going to trigger an election in 2022, no matter what. And it's highly unlikely that they were ever going to do so in 2023. So at least this gave people a reason to talk about the NDP. And if Jagmeet Singh had played his cards right, it was my assumption that he would, or at least do something good with the deal that he got. He would have been able to at least talk throughout the year and be proactive in saying, these are the things that we're going after. And then be able to put himself in a position where he could legitimately take credit for some of the things that the government pushed through. Instead, he came out throughout the year complaining about the government, what the government ended up doing, saying the Prime Minister didn't go far enough on dental care or on the housing benefit or the GIC. I believe I remember hearing some grumblings about that from the NDP that it didn't go far enough. But on the other hand, they also took credit for the fact that it got through. So the messaging has been totally mismatched throughout the year. And is it just me, or is this also like the third or fourth time that Jagmeet Singh has threatened to pull the plug on the government under the course of the year that this deal has been in place? So I don't get why this is coming up again now. And I got to be honest, it almost seems like Jagmeet Singh is going through his own little fall from grace here, at least as far as like the media is concerned, because earlier on, it did seem like he himself was having his own honeymoon phase, right? Where he could get away with saying some of these things that would make our friends in the staffer world cringe a little bit, that, you know, he would take positions that were clearly provincial in jurisdiction, or try to say things that, you know, the federal government had no business doing because it was either provincial or municipal in nature. And this is coming from a guy who sat as an MPP in Ontario for several years. He knows the difference between federal and provincial jurisdiction. And now he's kind of back into that pattern of asserting the federal government into provincial jurisdiction, saying on this whole idea of the health transfer, and he's taking the side of the premiers, but he's starting to get challenged. He's getting challenged of, why is he taking the side of premiers for unaccountable transfers under the Canada Health transfer that would just bloat the possible provincial spending, but has no tie to actual outcomes or any tie to accountability measures later on. So it's just striking what's going on there now. I'm being honest when I say I'm not sure what's actually going through his mind when he's doing so, because you got to remember that he's really only got one bullet in that chamber. And you got to be very, very precise of when you're going to pull the smoking gun out on backing out of that deal. And by all accounts, he's pulled it out way too early. And now if he ever tries to threaten it again, he's going to be the guy that cried wolf. And that's going to be a disaster for him going into the next election.
But let's just spitball this a second, Jake. If indeed Jagmeet Singh followed through with that threat, wouldn't that be a win for the Conservatives?
No, because the NDP vote is absolutely collapsing, especially in Ontario. That was one of the biggest outcomes that was noticed from the Mississauga Lakeshore by-election a couple of weeks ago, was that the NDP vote is essentially gone in a riding Conservatives have to capture in order to form government. So to Jon's point, this is political posturing, because Jagmeet Singh has to ensure that he doesn't look like he's completely sold out to the Liberal Party of Canada, including to some members of his caucus like Charlie Angus. But I think there's sprinkled in there some political malpractice in that the NDP might be waking up and realizing, especially when you look at the results of Mississauga Lakeshore, the NDP might be waking up and realizing that it's not true that Canadians don't give opposition parties credit for things governments do, no matter what the
Can I
circumstance.
just interject? For those that don't know, you're talking about the by-election where the results came in on December 12th, 40 candidates, the Liberals won, maintained that riding, the Conservatives failed to win it.
Correct, and the NDP vote collapsed from a share of vote perspective. And so I think, as I was just saying, I think the NDP have woken up and realized that political Canadians don't give credit to political parties for achieving things that government actually implements.
And perhaps as far-fetched as this whole idea of pulling out the smoking gun right now by Jagmeet Singh, that whole stunt that was the 40 extra candidates put on the ballot by, the progressive side to highlight the need for electoral change and to put pressure on the Prime Minister to follow through on his 2015 campaign promise, that really backfired too. Like that's two that were timed at the exact same time that just fell flat on their face. So it's very interesting to see it. And like Jake said, like it seems like there's been a resurgence of the Prime Minister. But quite frankly, for the Prime Minister, this is also good, because now the Prime Minister is in potentially a win-win situation, right? Like if Jagmeet Singh does actually follow through on this, because the Prime Minister comes out, meets with the premiers, backs out in a way similar to at least the anatomy of how Jean-Yves Duclos walked out of the room on the health ministers after the premiers themselves issued a press release saying that the talks were going nowhere while they were still in the meeting room. If the Prime Minister can orchestrate something like that to say the premiers are simply not willing to come to bat with the federal government on actually advancing outcomes and making health outcomes for Canadians better with the money that we're spending, that we're not getting, the cost benefit analysis isn't there right now to make this increased health transfer to the provinces. If he can come out with strong messaging around that, and then Jagmeet Singh pulls the plug on the government, he can then turn also and lay the blame on Jagmeet Singh for failures in healthcare, because Jagmeet Singh is now taking the position that all we want to do is throw money at a problem with no solutions being offered. So that's really strengthening the position of the
Singh will never pull his support for that deal. There's one thing that he values more than fixing the healthcare system, and that's his government paycheck. And if he pulls his support for that deal, there's a high degree of likelihood that he won't be leader of the NDP at the end of the day, and he may not even be an MP following that election. I think the most plausible outcome, to the point you were just making, John, is the Prime Minister manufacturing a conflict between him and Jagmeet Singh, but he will really have to reach into his bag of tricks in order to dissuade the NDP leader from the current situation that he has with the Liberals.
Which I do think you just gave a great piece of advice. Sorry to cut back in, Janet, but I think Jake just gave a great piece of advice to everyone in PMO, which is at this point, after 2021, when everyone knew that we were going to an election, but the federal government just kind of pulled the plug on the election, which was 2 years in, and it allowed that vacuum of space within the communications space for the opposition to say, oh, well, Justin Trudeau just wants another election because he wants a majority government. Well, this time it's going to be on the Liberals, if they are going to try to pull the plug early, to maybe put that poison pill into something that they're coming forward with, in whether it's budget this year or next year, to force the NDP's hand to really bring down the government. And that way the Liberals can go out and say, we need a mandate to get the job done.
If Justin Trudeau, correct, if Justin Trudeau pulled the plug himself, he may very well lose the next election. It almost cost him the last election. It backfired in a spectacular way. Both Conservatives, Liberals, and NDP have no understanding or idea why that issue resonated with Canadians at the time. It seems, a year and a half later, it might be the result of a movement within, Western democracies, where you see more and more voters rejecting ideology. And if the move to pull the plug on minority government to expand one's power and enforce one's ideology further was seen in a similar light, that could explain why Canadians got their backs up and were very close to rejecting the Liberals in the last election over that very issue.
But as the year draws to a close, I'm sure you both saw it earlier this week, Angus Reid came out with a poll that shows Trudeau's numbers have gone up. And whereas Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre's favorability ratings have gone down. So does that not give the Prime Minister more latitude, if you will, as to where he takes this? And maybe he doesn't need Jagmeet Singh as much as they did earlier to prop up his government.
It's incredibly dangerous. What goes up must come down. I think the Prime Minister has a number of different variables in his favor right now that help him deal with the common problem he's facing, which all prime ministers do, which is throw the bombs out. People get tired of their governments eventually and just don't elect them anymore. That said, there are the current direction of the Conservative Party, some of the deficits the Conservative Party has around its policy, its ideological approach to issues, its lack of digital capacity. These all play in the favor of the Prime Minister to continue to govern if there were a hypothetical election. But I think it's a long shot that he would ever expand his mandate, given how long in the tooth his government is right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I must say, like, just with Pierre Poilievre coming in as leader of the Conservatives, I think he's got a bit of a new wind under his sail. He's certainly got a new lease on life, at least as far as his job security as leader of the Liberals goes, right? Like, it created the ultimate foil for him, right? And the ultimate ability to increase his longevity as leader of the Liberals, at the very least, if not Prime Minister. And dare I say it, he's got an opportunity now, just kind of given what he's demonstrated in the past and how great of a campaigner he can be, that if he really wants to go on the offensive here, not necessarily in a negative way, but just start getting back on the front foot, not governing off the back foot. Going back to those days of, when Ezra Levant called him the shiny pony that could do no wrong, and going out there, being with Canadians, going out, addressing the issues head on, getting into some of these fights with the premiers is definitely going to be an asset that he can pull out of his sleeve at any moment in time to demonstrate that he's the one that has Canadians' backs. It's going to be a tight line that he's going to have to walk here. It's going to be very tight. But with Jagmeet going down in the way that he has over the last couple of weeks and months, it's definitely giving him a new lease on life. That's
the only thing is if progressives rally to the Prime Minister as a way to repel Pierre Poilievre, that's the only way he expands his mandate. He has nowhere to go from here, given the fact that he torched his own personal brand as that shiny pony in the last election to hold on to his minority government when things were going south on him around the midpoint of the election. And at the end of the day, people, the Liberals have wisely pivoted back to some reasonable messaging around energy, Canadian energy, and the necessity to grow that industry, balancing the budget. They're pivoting back to the center rapidly and quite frankly, laughably for anybody who's been watching for the last few years. But they're doing it nonetheless, and they're able to do it because there are two ideological opponents on their left and right. And again, as I said a few minutes earlier, Western democracies, the United States, Republicans, Democrats, NDP, Conservatives, people are rejecting ideology right now. They don't want ideology. They want pragmatism. There's a reason Doug Ford's winning in Ontario. People want someone who can be flexible, who can manage issues in a reasonable way without causing a big stink. And that's why the Prime Minister might have a new lease on life if he can get himself to an election anytime soon, which I highly doubt he can.
Mm-hmm. Finally, just before we go, and I hate answering these questions, but they're great ones to ask. Sorry. Look into your crystal ball. What's the one thing that you'll be looking for as we get into the new year? What to watch for on Parliament Hill?
Definitely the first thing off the bat is whether or not this first ministers meeting goes through, right? Like that's going to set the stage for the rest of the year. And there's going to be another bunch of fighting points for the Prime Minister if he wants them, whether it's on energy and tackling Danielle Smith, or whether it's on bringing on new energy projects, right? Like Jake actually just said something really interesting about the Liberals right now, which is that march back to the center. And it's something that I think Justin actually has to do from a caucus management perspective, right? Because he kind of got out there a little bit for a little while, maybe a little bit too far to the left for some of his caucus members that might live in, whether it's rural areas or whether it's on the East Coast, where yes, progressive governments or even like the Conservatives out here tend to be relatively progressive, but it's more close to the center. So you kind of run into an issue there where you got to manage your caucus. And, I don't like to speculate about the idea of a cabinet shuffle in January because, quite frankly, I don't think it's necessary at this point. I think you're just shuffling the cards for no reason. I don't know what your message is other than maybe throwing some minister under the bus. But right now, let bygones be bygones for someone like Marco Mendicino, who's less under the spotlight right now. Bill Blair, as much as he was mid to late last year, I don't think that's going to transition into the new year quite as much. Maybe with the gun bill, it could come creeping back. So they might need a refresh a little later into the year, but I don't think they need one necessarily immediately. But there's going to be a couple battle fronts opening up right away if he wants it, whether it's on healthcare, whether it's on energy. And like Jake said, they're coming back to the center. So this is a Liberal government that for a long time had been promising action on climate change. And the path that they've tended to take is one of relative centrism, right? Like it's been more market-based solutions. It's been more regulatory to kind of push people in that direction, push people towards EVs, people towards cleaner fuels. The government's been adamant about the fact that biofuel blending is going to be a critical component of reaching of our net zero emissions targets, because when you lower the carbon intensity of fuel, that's good for everybody. And the great thing about that is that Canada has an exportable product here that could be meeting the world's need for oil in a way long into the future. And, you know, the government did approve the Bay du Nord project off the coast of Newfoundland, which is billing itself as the cleanest oil and gas development project in the world, or had been at the time, at least, right? And even the environment minister said that energy projects are going to continue to be approved as long as they show best-in-class abatement technology in uptake and environmental stewardship. And as long as they demonstrate clearly that they're going to meet 2050 net zero operational targets. So the march back is very interesting here. And that I think could be a storyline throughout the year with respect to energy, but there's a couple battle lines starting to open up. And with Alberta going to an election this year, he might want to take the fight to Danielle Smith to help Rachel Notley even.
Wow, that's quite the short crystal ball gaze.
I'm going to be watching the jockeying in the Liberal Party for who will replace Justin Trudeau. So we have our usual contenders right now who are out there: Philippe Champagne, Chrystia Freeland. Does Chrystia Freeland start to see the writing on the wall, the reaction from some of her caucus members, the internal polling that no doubt shows that she actually repels people, she doesn't bring people together? What new people kind of come forward? Does Melanie Joly get into the fight? Someone who wants to start a young family but polls very well. Anita Nand, if you look at some of her Instagram and social feeds, been doing a lot of outreach in cultural communities. Is she someone that wants to step up? Because the more and more time goes on, the harder it is for Justin Trudeau to lead his party into the next election, despite the fact that I think he would find some level of success against Pierre Poilievre, given that both leaders are kind of the same ideological, crass, arrogant type of politician. And Canadians rarely replace the devil they know with the devil they don't know.
Well, lots to watch in the new year, and we'll be talking about it all then. That's all the time we have today. Thank you to my colleagues, Jake Enwright and Jon Dugal. I'm Janet Silver. Till next time.